so many reasons to do indoor painting, and of course when the weather is raining or snowing outside, it's a great opportunity to look at some of the things that you have around the house to as a subject instead of just an object you might use for drinking a cup of tea or so on and so forth. And in this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to set the table one object at a time. And then after we've drawn it, we're going to add another object. So I'm mixing up a dark with my medium. I have a little turpenoid, and my darkest colors are burnt umber and a deep blue and a little bit of quinacridone red to warm that up. So I'm looking at my blue jar and the situation in which it finds itself, sitting on top of something white against something tan. And I am simply drawing the line that is that connecting point between above and below, and then the outline, the contour line of the object itself. Now I'm placing a second object, and with the same color, I'm going to draw the contour line of that, making my best attempt to leave the proper amount of space between the second object and the first object. And there's a little tiny indentation on the top of that tangerine, so I was finding that little mark and putting it in. And after I've drawn the second object, I'm placing the third object and finding its contour line in relationship to the previous object as well as the one before. So some of this is eyeballing proportion. Is it bigger? Is it smaller? Is it shorter? Is it taller? Where does it line up with the tall blue vase? And where is its bottom line in relation to it, the small tangerine? And getting those relationships properly established is going to really help make it an accurate drawing. My apple might be a bit tall for this painting. You can be the judge of that. But those are the things that I'm looking at when I'm placing my lines. And so here I have another apple, the fourth object, which I draw after I've added that third. And at this stage, I've almost run out of canvas, so I am adding in some of my shadow shape lines. It looks a bit different from the vantage point in the video, but from where I'm sitting, it's sort of an arc of shadow that crosses the background. Some of those details I'm adding now just as I'm adding the object lines. So the contour line of the object, the contour line of the shadow, the line of the separation between the background and the foreground, the line of the drop off of the table, all become part of this simple sort of a jigsaw puzzle of a drawing. What I'm doing here is I placed an object in front of one of my objects, other objects. So I'm going back in and I'm eliminating that overlapping line with a piece of paper towel and a little bit of turpenoid, and you can see it's lifting away a little bit of the toned color that I had established before I began. So we have at the end of this about 7 actual physical objects with their shadows sitting on top of a plane with a plane behind it and a plane in front of it. Sort of 3 planes separated by 2 lines. And now what I'm going to do is just jump in there and start mixing up some colors. And I'm not going to mix every single color I'm seeing. I'm just going to start with the blues. And I have some ultramarine blue, and I'm adding titanium white to that. Sometimes you need to add a little white to a color in order to see what it's really all about. And I think titanium blue is one of those colors where a little bit of white helps it to really read as blue as it is. And I'm thinking puzzle shapes here again as well. I'm taking that slightly lightened ultramarine blue and painting in the shapes on the vase in which I see that color. And then the lighter, slightly lighter areas I'm painting with a slightly lighter, a little bit more white added into the mix. And I'm not blending, I'm just looking at shapes and what color is it in that shape? Coming up with what seems like my best approximation and then placing it. This is that inside, that interior part of the vase, which is a shadowed interior, and then the actual, opening. And then I'm noticing that the blue in the reflection on the right side of the vase is a slightly different temperature. It's a little cooler, so I mixed up a different blue for that purpose. So this is essentially the game of each of these objects getting its own little family of color, mixing up your blue and a couple of blues, and seeing which blue and which lightness and darkness of blue goes into which shape. It's really a lot like playing a jigsaw puzzle game. We're not blending each stroke into the next, and we're not trying to tell the whole story with every pore of the skin. What we're really trying to do is, with a light, a dark, and a mid-value, tell the story of the volume and color of each object in relation to the other objects on the in your setup. So with the green, I'm mixing up a green, lightening it with white. It's already been brightened with the yellow, and now I'm lightening that with white, and mixing up green in shadow. So green in shadow is still green, but it's green without as much light. And it might have in it some reflection of orange or reflection of something else. You want to really look for those nuances, but for this assignment, you're looking for what is the general shape, what is the general color of that particular shape. So it's an apple green in shadow. What is that going to look like? And here's the apple green in the light, catching all that, artificial light that we have set up to illuminate this. And then there's a little shadow between the tangerine and the orange. So that shadow may have within it a little bit of orange reflection as well. So I mixed in a little bit of orange into my blue to warm that up a bit. But not spending 20 minutes doing each little mix, just taking an approximate sort of, what do they say? There's something about it's good enough for a hand grenade or something where you get close enough and then you move on. This is not about getting it exact. It's about getting it approximate, telling the big story quickly, roughing these colors in, and then moving on. So here's the shadow, the color of tan, this sort of piece of cardboard in the shadow. It's very light. There's a lot of light in this whole composition, even though there is a sense of shadow, but they're not really dark shadows. So this looks really light, but when we get the light of that color next to it, you'll see that in fact it is not only a darker color, but it's also a bit of a duller color. And in the artificial light, this tan has a bit of a pink aspect to it, which sort of surprised me. So I've added a mixture of pink to my tan color, and that also creates more contrast with the shadowed areas. Here I'm using the negative shape to redraw the whole thing. And every time you have an opportunity to go in and paint the negative shapes, it gives you a chance to go back and carve away some area that may have gotten a little bit too tall or wide, or find that shape. And you see shapes better when you're looking at negative shapes. You have no names attached to those shapes, so you tend to have a better spatial understanding of them. When you're mixing up your white, it's almost never going to be white out of the tube. It's usually going to be white with something in it, typically a little bit of, let's say it's a warm yellow, a warm white, you might add a little bit of yellow, but not just yellow. You're not going to end up just with a light yellow. You're really getting kind of a tinge, a white tinged with warmth, and this has a little bit of the dullness of the colors I was painting with tipped in, and then a little bit of the yellow to brighten it, mostly titanium white. I'm using titanium white because titanium white is a strong, opaque white. If you're using zinc or permalba white, which is a mixture of zinc and titanium. It's a thinner, more transparent color. So if you're really trying to cover something, make a punch, make a bright, bright highlight, titanium is the choice I would recommend. If you're trying to create something that's a wash of light over something that allows the under color to come through, zinc or permalba can be good choices for you. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. I always really like leaving a little bit of that shape of light behind a shadow, because it really reminds you that in fact we are looking at light crossing a form, and where that form isn't touching the background, light can sneak through, and there it is. It's the little wonderful shape that really makes that pop, I feel. And I also have one of my objects going off the edge of the composition, because that also breaks that line and gives you kind of a sense that you've dropped in to this warm and cheery scene, this cold, wet, wintry day. Happy painting.